who or what has shaped your analysis and actions in the work that you're doing today? Mentors, books, movements, events, resources, people or things or experiences that have been significant to you in your journey?
I found this question difficult to answer in the past when you have asked me this before because there are so many people and there are so many experiences, and I take very seriously every interaction that I have, people that I love and people that I learn about over time. And I don't know, it's difficult to say this one thing happened we talked about the organizing journey
Yeah.
in graduate school. I attribute a lot to my grandmother and my parents. And my sister was our unit of 5 of us growing up, and my parents are immigrants from India and didn't have I will say this, that was the first now I there are words now as I've gotten older and can understand life in a different way. When you think about asset framing versus deficit frame, I look back and my how my parents have conducted their lives and how they think about how to support community and be in community, asset framing is exactly the way I would describe it. Because it's not like they came to America with an abundance of resources at all. It was very difficult. And talk about learning systems, navigating all of this. Both of my parents repeated education to remain competitive. There were so many layers of this that some versions of stories I know, some I probably will never know, some they probably will never share.
Hmm.
But I think a lot about how I never can think of a time growing up that I didn't see them do something for someone else. And something that I really which has been interesting to put into context for today, like this moment in time, is that it's always been do good deeds quietly. No one needs to know what you did. If you start talking about what you did, it takes value away from what you did. So that's been interesting because we live in this post everything online, tell the
Yep.
world what you
Social
right.
media. Yeah.
Oh, like, what's your elevator pitch? There's all this stuff you're taught about of like how to market yourself and how to when really the basis of a lot of it is just do good things quietly. And so I think that I saw them, I continue to see that in them. And I saw it in my grandmother too. She's no longer alive, but I grew up with her and I saw what it meant to, especially in her life, overcome tremendous hardship, trauma, so many things in her life, and still come here, really start a new life with us here, and still find ways to have joy and understand forgiveness and put a lot of love into the things that you do and always have an open door in your house and make sure people are always coming over. And so for us was really awesome to see my parents embedded us really in cultural things and we were so much there, but also they were very clear about and also you live in America now. Like we live in America. We live in Southfield. There are things you need to do to contribute to your community here too.
Hmm.
So that is something I very much value as what has always made me feel like there's something to be done. There's something to do. There's something that I have, no matter what positioning I'm in, there's something to do for someone else. It's because all of them, there was always a sense of, there was a both and, which I really like because for them, if you ask them, what does community mean? Sure, they can identify with our cultural groups and all of that stuff. But they also very much were like, you live in Southfield, Michigan. What are you doing for Southfield, Michigan?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I took that very seriously. And I really like that I know they were very intentional about a lot of things that they did, but I don't know if they know that a lot of the things that they did quietly were things that we saw
Cool.
and we witnessed.
Cool.
And my sister and I think about a lot of the ways they showed up for people. And so for strangers and people they knew alike. And so that was all of the elders, my parents, my grandmother and extended family and all that. So I think about continues to influence me is that within whatever lane I'm in, my sister is a physician and she's also in a helping field. So like my mom always says that whatever you are, whatever your lane is, what are you doing for other people? Do something for someone else. Um, so yeah, I think about that a lot as like the people. It's like the grounding. Obviously, over time, my family has grown. I have a wonderful husband. I think about him a lot, who also has very much influenced me to consistently think about the macro, our ability to influence change on a macro level. He pursued a degree in education policy and he thinks about K-12 school finance and is always here to say, you know what? That isn't right. That needs to be fixed. And so I think it's real. I'm very lucky and very thankful to be surrounded by people who are always thinking about how we fit into society, how our individual identities fit, but then what is the whole? What is our role in influencing the whole? And so there's a lot of what do we do as individuals to be good people in our own homes? That's another part of all of this I think about a lot. I really hope that my best accomplishment in life is that I have been a good granddaughter, a good daughter, a good sister, a good wife. I hope that those are things that I hold very close to my heart outside
Mhm.
of anything professional. And I hope that those relationships and that love builds into how I show up in the world. So, yeah, those are my people. And of course, more people over time. And I think there's, of course, we were talking about this a little before we started. There's a lot of the movement books. We read a lot of them in school, a lot of incredible, and we study a lot about social movements. And I didn't realize this until you asked this question. I had to write it down when you said, what books, what keeps you curious or interested? So I started reading so in a more recent way. Okay, I'll take this back. When we were younger, like I mentioned, grew up very, very much embedded in our cultural and religious identities. And we read a lot of the Hindu epic stories, mythology or religious texts, all of them. We read everything and had a baseline understanding of who the good guys, who the bad guys were, what are all the side stories, who are the people. And from the versions of the stories we read, the women, even if they were the protagonists, didn't really have take up so much space in the stories when
Yeah.
you're like, I think there's a lot more there than what's being told, or the version I'm reading hasn't really talked about all of those things. Right? And so in more recent years, I've been introduced and more authors are coming out, a lot of Indian women authors who are rewriting these texts from a female's perspective. So from a woman, a main character, in some like a perceived villain, but really what was her story. And I realized, so I've
Ooh.
always towards those books. So I've been interested in those books for a long time, a lot of historical fiction. And I read them and I'm like, just so taken. I just, when you say you fall in love with the book and you can't stop reading, like I get that way. And then I realized, like when you ask me that question, I'm like, what am I connect? How am I going to connect these dots into what do I actually like to read? And it's because these authors are putting in front of us a version of the story that was never told, right? Like, how do I know that the book that I read that's supposed to be the original text is the only way that the story could have happened?
Mhm.
Like, oh, there's other perspectives. Oh, women are warriors too. Oh, I guess this person can also do this thing. And so that's just totally opened my mind in a very, it's been so incredible. And I think when I think about influence of what keeps me motivated, what keeps me going is that it just shows the power of these women that were often depicted as powerless or incapable of fighting in a war or doing a thing. And here they are when they were like the leaders and masterminds of everything. And so
Yeah.
that's just been, it's been incredible to read a lot of that and to think through how women, Indian women, have been impacting change for generations, centuries, thousands of years, right? Like it's not that it wasn't there. That's the other part of it too. It's this is new to me. This is not new to the universe, right? This is new to me in reading these versions of these stories, but it's been pretty incredible in influencing how I think about that there is still work to be done, that there are still stories that need to be told. There are still people who need the opportunity to tell those stories. There are vantage points we've never even seen or heard yet.
Mm.
Like, there's just so much to be done. So that was a fun question that you asked that really made me think. I know I love these books, but I wasn't connecting the dots as to exactly why, but I love reading books about strong women.
Yeah, and as you've connected those dots here today, my hope is that others who are listening are gonna be able to connect those dots too. And you said it a few times, just the importance of more storytelling. How do we know that this one version of the thing is the only thing? Wait a minute, there are other people who were here. What was their perspective? And then you come in to recognize and like all along, yeah, these women were actually the masterminds behind this stuff. I think that has a lot of important equity implications. Who are we listening to? Whose stories are one often getting promoted, but then also what about the voices that we're not hearing? And what would it be like to hear those voices, right? What would it be like to hear those voices more consistently? How would that change our total perspective and understanding of what we actually think is true and real, but then also what we also think is possible too?
Who gets to tell the story? Who
Mm,
gets to? I'm Indian. My dad, especially, is very knowledgeable about all things Indian history. So we grew up trying to learn as much as we could from him and things. But then I look back on some of it and I'm like, well, who wrote the books? First, you get to read,
mm,
not for him, but I'm like, I'm always curious. I'm like, when you were in school, which textbooks were you given? Obviously, you form your own opinions after you leave certain settings and stuff, but that's also another thing. Like, talk about historical fiction. I like to read a lot of things set in pre partition in colonial India
mhm.
time. Because now there are stories, I'm sure there have been for many times, again, new to me, probably not new to the world, but there are more and more stories being written by from perspectives that are not the colonizer. And
Yes,
so
yes,
that also feels
yes.
really liberating and wonderful to just have a glimpse into what else was happening in that time and what not only, I don't know, not only the violence, not only the atrocities, and also what was the power in the people? What were the movements like? So I also read a lot of that.
For the folks, the books, the people that you mentioned that were influential to you, what would you say to them or about them in terms of gratitude?
My deep gratitude is that you just don't ever know how one thing you have done or said or written can stay with someone for the rest of their lives.
Mm,
You just never know, and that is something that I think is so beautiful about life. I think about some of the authors where, like, now it's maybe easier to catch them on social media or say something to them, but the deep gratitude that I have for reading some of the books that I'm like, "Am I crying? What's happening right now?" Right? You're
yes, yes.
feeling, right? Or I think about one interaction I had with my grandma where she might have said something, one sentence. She might have said nothing. She might have just we might have just been sitting in silence, but I know what that has meant for me over the course of my life.
Mhm.
With my parents, like, I think this is true of most parents, right? Where there are always things that they do that maybe they don't realize you saw them
Yeah.
do it. Like, I saw you make that sacrifice. And maybe it took a long time, late a month. And I think about how much gratitude I have in that when I think about both my parents and Ajay's parents, is that we're at a place in our lives where we started our married life in such a different way than they started theirs. You know, my parents moved, both sets of parents moved to another country away from their parents at a time where there was no the way communication wasn't the way it is today. My mom told me that once. She said, "I didn't know the next time I would hear my mother's voice. And look
Mm.
at you calling me from anywhere in the world," right? So there are these things that as technology, life, as resources have changed. Like, I think my deepest gratitude is that although the struggle continues and there is work to be done, all of the people along the way, all of our family members, all of our networks have out their careers, or when they want to build a family, like, we're in a very different position. And there is one thing, you can always attribute, you can say financial resources. Yeah, of course, like, that's a big part of life, right? Like, earning money to be able to do the things you want to do. And also, it's just, what does it mean to have very strong networks of people? Like, I don't ever take that lightly. My deepest gratitude is for the communities that we have been privileged to be a part of. And I mean that in geographic communities, cultural, religious, family, that just will never take that lightly. And I also know that sometimes there are some things in our lives that have been very big things that have happened that we'll always remember. And then some really small things. And there are acts of kindness and generosity that I
Mm.
already see from my nieces who are 7 and 4. That's beautiful to me, right? That's what really brings me joy, and I just have such deep gratitude for all of the people that we get to have in our lives.